My interest, I think, came about when I was a teenager, actually, when I realized that life really wasn't what I thought it was, and things didn't really occur in the way that I wanted them to occur, and I couldn't understand why people behaved the way they did, because none of it made sense to me. So I think from the time I was young, I was on a journey of trying to understand what life was about, and how can I make my dreams happen. And one of the things that happened to me in my childhood was that my mother was a great cook, but she loved to bake and make sugary things, and so I ate a lot of sugar, and I was really, really depressed. So I think that when I discovered nutrition later in my life and what that was all about, which nobody knew what it was about when I first got into nutrition, I started a catering business and made gourmet food, and still didn't feel well because I was eating a lot of it and sugary things. But when I wanted to get pregnant, I met someone who talked to me about eliminating certain foods and went on a program of eating healthy and had the best pregnancy imaginable. I had more energy than I've ever had in my life. And so after that point, I wanted to study nutrition and went to school to get a PhD in nutrition. And that was sort of the beginning of my journey, because from that point on, I started learning all kinds of techniques and processes that were really just available to chiropractors and naturopaths and acupuncturists. And so I combined nutrition with all kinds of other modalities to help people, which led me to neuroemotional technique, which is the most amazing process, I think, that exists for releasing emotional patterning in the brain.
So we started in nutrition, and then through nutrition, you found that studying NET was as effective or more effective than changing our nutritional habits?
No, it's one of the components. One of the things we look at when we're looking at any individual are the stressors that a person has in their life. And we call it the home run formula, where everybody consists of 4 bases, basically, where there's a structural or energetic side to every person, there's a nutritional side, and then there's a biochemical/toxic side, as well as an emotional side. So in dealing with a whole person, in order to help them with whatever their challenges are, you have to deal with all of the bases. You can't just be selective and deal with one. So most people have more than one problem area, so to speak. And neuroemotional technique, which deals with the emotional base, is something I help people with on an ongoing basis, because the repetitive process of doing this kind of emotional releasing work helps people break down emotional programming and eradicate beliefs that are holding them back, whether it's in their health or in creating other things that they want in their life.
And how many people have you seen over the years with utilizing your home run formula and NET?
Thousands. I wouldn't know how to count that many. Because I've been doing neuroemotional techniques since its onset, which was about 30 years ago. And fortunately, I got in on the ground floor with Dr. Scott Walker, who was the amazing research scientist who developed neuroemotional technique. So I've been studying it ever since, and every client that I've ever seen, I've always done neuroemotional technique on them. In fact, I won't work with a patient unless they're willing to deal with the emotional component, because if they don't deal with the emotional component, then chances are they're just going to remanifest whatever their challenge is, even if it's a physical challenge.
So in dealing with many, many thousands of people over the years, I'm sure you have a really good perspective on the paths people take to find happiness. And many of us have dreams that we'd love to materialize, but for whatever reason, they don't take the actions that are necessary, or have the belief systems in place in order to not just achieve them, but even take steps towards them. Mm-hmm. What is it, through your experience, that you believe that keeps people from A, properly identifying their dream, and B, going after it? So I guess that it's a 2-part question. So the first question is, how do we know how to even identify our dream?
I think that's so interesting you asked it in that way, because I want to talk about that, but in order to do that, I want to describe a little bit about what a neuroemotional complex is, and it might make more sense. Just real quickly, basically we have three major parts to our brain: the conscious brain, the subconscious, and the primitive brain. And I think most of us, at least I sure believe this until I studied all these things, believe that our conscious brain is the biggest part of ourself, or our brain, and that we are the determiner through conscious thinking of what we want. And in case science has, in other words, science has proven that the subconscious brain, which is our emotional brain or our limbic system, is actually the bigger brain. And scientifically speaking, it processes something like 40 million bits per second, and the conscious brain 40. So from the time we're in the womb, we all get conditioned due to the environment that we're coming into, what's happening in our environment, genetic programming, and things like that. So we all have different programs or conditions or conditionings. And what happens for most people is somewhere along the line they've been programmed to not believe in themselves, or that they can create what they want. So what happens is, because of the programming that we have, we don't believe we can have what we want, and we give up at different points along the way. Some people don't. So when we look at really successful people and wonder, well, why were they able to make this happen? You know, where somebody else who may be just as talented couldn't make it happen. Well, something about that individual never gave up and didn't have the programming that thwarted them in their endeavor to go forward and create what they want. So in answering the question about even know what we want, what I've found is that in working with people, that we all have defense mechanisms that are related to the subconscious programming. And those defense mechanisms, some of them are about denial. So we're in denial, or we don't know what we want. And it isn't really that the individual doesn't know what they want. It's just that it's been so repressed to know that lots of people will say, gee, I don't know what I want, you know, just like you said. And the truth is they do. They just don't know with their conscious brain what they want, because it's been repressed due to whatever doubt they have, whatever beliefs they have about themselves, being able to create it. Or other people have defense mechanisms like rationalization, and they'll rationalize why they can't have it, or they'll talk about the collective, like, for example, in Hollywood, that women over the age of 40 or something can't get parts, and that's just a collection of beliefs that people have had, and then people buy into it, and so they don't go beyond that. And so the point is to even unravel or reveal what people want. A lot of times we have to break down some of the programming, and then they start feeling and understanding what they're really interested in.
Okay. So what are if somebody finds themselves at a point in their lives and they're not satisfied, and they feel as though they're living the same day over and over again, I feel like it'd be hard for somebody to individually access their conscious brain. I mean, most of us feel like we only have one brain. We don't realize
Right.
there's multiple layers. So how would somebody who wants a better existence, or who wants to live a more fulfilling life, take the first step into that direction?
I think that's so interesting you asked it in that way, because I want to talk about that, but in order to do that, I want to describe a little bit about what a neuroemotional complex is, and it might make more sense. Just real quickly, basically we have three major parts to our brain: the conscious brain, the subconscious, and the primitive brain. And I think most of us, at least I sure believe this until I studied all these things, believe that our conscious brain is the biggest part of ourself, or our brain, and that we are the determiner through conscious thinking of what we want. And in case science has, in other words, science has proven that the subconscious brain, which is our emotional brain or our limbic system, is actually the bigger brain. And scientifically speaking, it processes something like 40 million bits per second, and the conscious brain 40. So from the time we're in the womb, we all get conditioned due to the environment that we're coming into, what's happening in our environment, genetic programming, and things like that. So we all have different programs or conditions or conditionings. And what happens for most people is somewhere along the line they've been programmed to not believe in themselves, or that they can create what they want. So what happens is, because of the programming that we have, we don't believe we can have what we want, and we give up at different points along the way. Some people don't. So when we look at really successful people, and wonder, well, why were they able to make this happen? You know, where somebody else who may be just as talented couldn't make it happen. Well, something about that individual never gave up and didn't have the programming that thwarted them in their endeavor to go forward and create what they want. So in answering the question about even know what we want, what I've found is that in working with people, that we all have defense mechanisms that are related to the subconscious programming. And those defense mechanisms, some of them are about denial. So we're in denial, or we don't know what we want. And it isn't really that the individual doesn't know what they want, it's just that it's been so repressed to know that lots of people will say, gee, I don't know what I want, you know, just like you said. And the truth is they do. They just don't know with their conscious brain what they want, because it's been repressed due to whatever doubt they have, whatever beliefs they have about themselves, being able to create it. Or other people have defense mechanisms like rationalization, and they'll rationalize why they can't have it, or they'll talk about the collective, like, for example, in Hollywood, that women over the age of 40 or something can't get parts, and that's just a collection of beliefs that people have had, and then people buy into it, and so they don't go beyond that. And so the point is to even unravel or reveal what people want. A lot of times we have to break down some of the programming, and then they start feeling and understanding what they're really interested in.
Okay. So what are if somebody finds themselves at a point in their lives and they're not satisfied and they feel as though they're living the same day over and over again, I feel like it'd be hard for somebody to individually access their conscious brain. I mean, most of us feel like we only have one brain. We don't realize
right.
There's multiple layers. So how would somebody who wants a better existence, or who wants to live a more fulfilling life, take the first step into that direction?
Well, that's a tough question, because I think the person has to be motivated enough to want to get help to do that, because I think we're all stuck in our programming. A lot of people, part of the defense mechanism is to not get help and to feel that you can do it all on your own, which some really great minds have tried to do that and haven't really been able to successfully do that. And it's just a way, I think, of keeping people stuck. So without some kind of outside intervention, it's pretty hard to break the programming. I mean, there's certain processes and exercises you can do in regard to creating a dream by just writing it out, telling a story about it, drawing a symbol for it, meditating or focusing on it. But unfortunately, whatever the programming is that's thwarted it isn't going to go away just through doing those processes.
In your years of having your practice, describe to us some of your success stories that come to mind. People who are able to do a 180 on their lives.
Well, I guess offhand, the first person I thought of was a young woman who came to me, and the reason why I'm telling this story is because she had a really severe case of what had been diagnosed as lupus. So when she came in, she was really, really sick. She had a young son and a husband, and was a therapist. She wasn't licensed yet, but she was trying to do her hours, but so exhausted she couldn't really do them. And when she came in, she was pretty hopeless that anything was ever going to get better, because in Western medicine they pretty much discouraged her that she would have, you know, a better life at all, and she was on a lot of medications and so forth. And so when I started working with her, we went through all the different bases, as I described, that you have to look at the energetic, structural, nutritional, and toxicity and emotional base. And so we did a lot of work on the nutritional base, because her diet was really bad and she was eating a lot of foods that she was sensitive to, which absolutely affects chemistry in the brain. And she had a virus. Lots of times in autoimmune cases like lupus, people will have a viral infection, like a chronic viral infection, or they'll have some major toxin like heavy metals. So we worked on eradicating the virus by supporting her body with nutrients, and we did a lot of neuroemotional technique, and she'd had an extremely challenging childhood. And so by working on her programming or releasing it from her childhood. Oh, the other symptom she had was extreme anxiety and fear. So she had a hard time even driving her car or going out of her house or doing anything because her anxiety was so great. So through the process of taking the nutritional supplements, changing her diet, and doing neuroemotional technique, she completely recovered from lupus. In fact, the last doctor she went to said that he couldn't even find any evidence of having it, so at this point he was just going to say that she didn't have lupus at all. And she's pregnant again for the second time and having a really healthy pregnancy. You know, it's pretty much individual, but you know, there's so much popularity right now in being gluten-free and dairy-free and everything, and there's a reason for that. Gluten isn't always a direct allergy. What it does is it causes the intestine to produce a chemical called zonulin. And zonulin basically breaks down the tight junctions in the intestine, which causes food particles and other things to pass through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. And the integrity of the intestinal wall is actually the same as the blood-brain barrier. So as the intestine starts breaking down, and that's why there's so much commonality between people with digestive disorders and having brain dysfunctions, because those chemicals, foods, and so forth will pass through the blood-brain barrier. So there's a tremendous amount of evidence right now about brain autoimmunity, which I think is very popular in the football world, where they know, for example, with brain injuries, that football players and other people who have had severe blows to the head actually develop really horrible diseases or illnesses later. And it's the same thing, that any organ or any area in the body, including the brain, that starts breaking down, what happens is it leaks its antigenic cells into the bloodstream, and the immune system attacks it, which is good to get rid of it out of the bloodstream. But then those antibodies go to that particular organ or part of the brain and start attacking it. So it's the same thing whether we're talking about gluten or we're talking about an infection or we're talking about a toxin. So I think the whole subject of autoimmunity is really interesting in this day and age, because pretty much anyone that has any kind of a major health issue that's showing up in an organ in their body has the beginning of an autoimmune disease. It's just that in Western medicine they only call it an autoimmune disease when it reaches its final stage and there's severe tissue destruction. But again, anytime an organ is under assault and it starts breaking down, it's a setup for autoimmunity, and that's a lot of what happens in the brain, even with bad foods. Other people have food reactions that are allergies. They're actual allergies where the immune system is responding to it directly, not just because it's creating leakage in the intestine.
So what you're saying is that a lot of this, who only once it becomes an autoimmune disease does it get a name, but many of us are on that path.
Exactly. There's 3 stages of autoimmunity. The first stage, usually there's no symptoms whatsoever, so a person doesn't even know what's going on. The second stage is you can have mild symptoms of something, so it's already starting to occur. And the third stage is what they recognize mostly in Western medicine, where there's a loss of something, and you know, something's really impaired. And that's when they put you on medication for it.
And what could those of us who don't want to go down that path, it seems already well trodden, what can we do to avoid walking down that path?
Well, what I do with patients that other alternative practitioners do is we find out the cause of the problem. So you always have to, whatever health challenge a person has, it's not about treating the symptom, it's about treating the cause or eradicating the cause, which could be an infection, a chronic infection, it could be allergies, it could be toxic metals or toxins from the environment. I mean, there's a lot of literature on all of that right now, where it's a buildup of certain toxicities or chronic infections that the body can't deal with, and so you have to do whatever you can to get rid of it and restore the health of the organ through different supplements.
So what are things that the average person can do to lead a life that's not going to go spiraling towards disease?
Well, I think a good place to start really is with the diet. You know, where you start eliminating processed foods, sugar from your diet, and think about eating just whole foods. You know, whole fruits and vegetables, organic grass-fed meats, pasture-raised eggs, raw milk products. If you can tolerate dairy, most people can't tolerate it. So pretty much getting rid of anything that's packaged or processed, because all those foods are devitalized and they don't have nutrients in them. Using cold pressed or expeller pressed oils and refrigerating them, because any oil, plant oil that's heated is already rancid, which is really bad. Having good saturated fats like organic butter and meats and things like that. So unfortunately, so many people eat processed and packaged foods, so that's a really good place to start, is just getting rid of that and getting rid of sugar out of your diet.
So in saying that, so you're saying that in order for us to reach towards and take strides towards our dreams, a really good place to start is through our diet.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good place to start, and I think exercise is another really healthy place, and there's a lot of new studies and information about exercise in terms of how important it is. I think people getting Fitbit is really great because it keeps those that don't like to exercise that much more interested in being able to count the steps that they're taking. And one of the best things is high intensity exercise, because there's a lot of studies demonstrating how it reverses metabolic disorder, diabetes, regulates blood sugar, helps brain growth. And it's so simple because you can do it within a span of 20 minutes when you're really busy. And what it is basically is where you just go all out for 30 seconds on whatever aerobic exercise you're doing, so much so that you can't talk. And then you go through your regular, if you're cycling, let's say cycling for a minute and a half, and then you do another 30 seconds of high intensity and do it for 8 reps, which only takes about 20 minutes or so. And it's really amazing the changes, in addition to doing some kind of anaerobic exercise like slow burn. Slow burn is an amazing exercise also to work different muscle fibers that also have an effect on the metabolism.
In an effort to go after our dreams, we're eating better, we're exercising. What's next?
Got to have some way that you work on your consciousness. You know, I think it's different for individuals, depending on what your belief is, you know, what your spiritual belief is, finding some way to take time for yourself and to rest and regenerate, which stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Meditation is great because it allows you to get to that state and to move out of your conscious thinking brain and your programming. And I really believe going to different healthcare practitioners and getting support that way is really essential to keep your energy in alignment, and also working on your emotional programming for whatever you want to create.
From what we understand, we're all on this earth one time around. Why isn't everybody going after it and living it to the fullest? How is it that so many of us find ourselves in positions where, like, I can't believe this is happening. Why is this? Why? You know, and why would we continue to let a negative outcome continue to happen?
Well, I really believe it's because of the conditioning, and what a term that Freud coined, which was called repetition compulsion, meaning that anytime an organism is traumatized or repeatedly conditioned in any situation, such as we are growing up, that we will repeat it over and over again. So I think what you're really talking about is repetition compulsion, where people will just not consciously but non-consciously keep repeating the same events, making the same choices. And that's the point about, if you really want change, you have to be willing to go in and change your brain patterning, because you cannot think your way out of a pattern. So many people have tried, or they've tried to just meditate their way out of a particular pattern that they recognize. For example, let's say picking relationships where they're abandoned over and over again, or they feel abandoned, or people that feel that they're in lack and they just can't create enough of what they want. Well, those are examples of patterns that a person is in. And so without making those biochemical changes, we're just going to go out and create the same thing. And I think it's really interesting if people would take a look at the repetitions they have in their life in creating the same patterns, and you just can't think your way out of it. That just because you think an opportunity is come in that all of a sudden everything's going to be different. I think people experience that a lot with relationships, where they've had bad relationships and then they meet someone else and think it's going to be completely different, and after a short time it's the same thing again. I think that's human nature. I mean, it's part of programming and how human nature is it takes a lot to be a person that wants to learn how to create something new and different consciously in their life instead of just repetitively falling into the same old pattern. One of the things that I help patients do, and people can start doing it right away, is to start reframing what's happening in their life. Because when you want to create a new pattern in the brain, you have to be willing to view your circumstance differently. So you can take any circumstance and then turn it into a different experience just based on how you view it. So our tendency is, if we're having trouble with someone or something, and using the example of my relationship with my sister is a perfect example, where my whole life I was conditioned into a certain relationship with her where she's an older sister and I was shy and introverted, and she was very outgoing and controlling, and very controlling in terms of wanting everybody to do what she wants. So I grew up in fear of people that had that kind of control or anger issues the way she did, and my father did also. So I was always afraid of people with anger, and at a point in my life where she was still trying to control me and would get really angry about things that we had to work on together was something, and I was in fear a lot of her and generally would just go along with her. So what happened is, when I really dug in and started doing the work that I'm talking about and getting some NET on it and releasing it, because that had been the basis for a lot of the relationships that I'd had in my life, what I would do is every time she would call me up and yell at me about something, after we hung up, I would reframe it, where I would look at it differently. I would see the value in what she was saying in terms of what the message was, not just her screaming at me about something. And then I would always connect and focus on that her intention underneath it was to be really loving and caring. And most of our conversations at that point were about taking care of my mother. And so I spent some time on really connecting to her heart and how she really just wanted to help, so that by the end of what I focused on after the event, I started feeling better, and I would just focus on that her intention is, it's a really good intention. And then I took steps of whatever I needed to at that point to not allow myself to be in those scenarios with her. But to my surprise, because I never really felt our relationship would improve, over a period of time of me practicing what I'm describing, she became very different in my life, and now we have a wonderful relationship, and it's hard to even remember when we related the way we used to. And that's because I just kept reframing and holding the vision of what I knew was true about her. So any situation you can take that's happening that's upsetting you or challenging, and if you're willing to look at it, and even if you think you're just making it up, like let's say you get fired from your job and that's the worst possible thing. And I've had a lot of clients come in with this issue, and it's devastating, of course, because, you know, what are you going to do financially and the whole thing? But if you're willing to look at it and say, well, the only reason this happened is because it isn't really what I wanted, and then you'll find out how you're not happy, and then focus on it happened because I was afraid to let it go, and I want to let something good in my life now that I really want to do, and that's why it happened. So this is my opportunity. So now you're already changing your perspective on it, which of course then opens you up to finding the job of your dreams. I just had that happen with a client recently, and we worked on it with NET, and she just was convinced. She had a high position in the record industry, and was convinced she'd never get another job that allowed her to be with her kids again. And you know, after we worked on changing her point of view on it, and she was focusing on it, and then opportunities started coming in, and then she got the perfect job of her dreams, and it was exactly what she had mapped out and focused on, as she got out of the fear of thinking this was a loss and she would never have it again.
What about those dreams that are floating in our minds? And I know that, you know, eat right, exercise, get help to kind of clear out some of the cobwebs and start having the energy. But I feel like in my, I see so many people here in Los Angeles, and there's a dream that's in the peripheral of our mind. And let's take for me as an example, so long as we're sharing, my background is in television production. I'm a television producer. But I personally love Jack LaLanne. I thought he was a superstar, and to this day, he's my embodiment of a superstar. And for me to become the next Jack LaLanne, I guess I would imagine I'd have to do one of two things. I'd have to get certified as a personal trainer, and or also start looking into cooking classes so I could learn how to cook fantastic meals for help that I would love to be able to part of. But while that's happening and I'm dreaming of that, I have a career that I've built that's successful. So on a daily basis, I get opportunities to develop and promote that career in television. So how do for me it's a scary idea. Am I going to say no to this opportunity that doesn't really give me a lot of gratification in order for me to take a leap into something completely different? It's scary. It's something I struggle with, and I can imagine a lot of people struggle with as well.
I don't think you really have to take a leap, though. See, I think that when you have, like, if you were just going along doing your producing jobs, before you had the dream, and not that happy, that's the repetition where you're just going along doing your job. The difference is now you have a dream, you have a vision and a goal. Oh, this is what I'm creating in my life. And one of the great things about having a dream is if you can also extrapolate from whatever your specific dream is, what is the feeling of what you really want. So you have Jack LaLanne as a vision, like I want to be like him. I don't think you want to be exactly like him, because there's probably a lot of things about him you wouldn't want to be, because you're you, and you have other gifts and talents that you want to bring to the forefront, but he's a model. So if you take the feeling of what he represents to you and you go, oh, that's my vision, he represents whatever, and it's a good thing to write it out and visualize it. And, I'm going to bring more things to it, whatever those things are that are your interests. So now you have a vision. So if you stay focused and do some kind of a meditative exercise every day on your vision, then everything that comes along is helping you to create it, even if it's, let's say, a producing job that comes along. So and I'll tell you why in a minute, it's different than a producing job that just you're repetitively taking these jobs just to make money. So let's say somebody offers you a job, and you feel the job and you go, is there any part about this that feels a little bit like my dream? So you have to go job by job, for example, and you go, I don't know, something about it feels good because I like the people that are offering me the job and gives me freedom or whatever. So, and then another job comes along, you go, ugh, this is something I really don't want to do. So everything you're picking that feels good and feels like the feeling of your ultimate dream you're creating is part of your momentum in getting there. So you don't know, you could take that job that's for a month or two or something and then meet the next person that's going to help you create your dream. So if you kind of feel and visualize your way through every opportunity, you're moving in a momentum or a direction for you to have your dream and to define it even more.
How do we keep the faith, and I'll call it following our North Star? How do we find the courage to follow our North Star and not get bumped off the track?
I think that's a really good question, because I know personally, and in working with people, I think we all go through periods of doubt. And I feel that if I didn't have supportive people in my life that helped me through those times, I could see how people that don't have as much will as I have, because it takes a lot of courage and will to keep going, that I would fall off the bus, so to speak. And that's what people do, is they'll collapse into their doubt instead of going forward. And again, that's why I really advocate having someone or others in your life that are helping you with these things, so that you don't just give up. Because that is the tendency of human nature to, if we have these big roadblocks inside of us that will just collapse into the roadblock because we don't have enough faith in ourselves to know. And I look at people in life who have been so incredible. Nelson Mandela being my favorite hero of all. He's such an example because he was so open about his life and who he was before he went to prison. And it's a perfect example of how his imprisonment and what he did with it is what made him become the man that he was. And he said that if he hadn't gone to prison, well, he probably would have died in the streets with the other people that were rebelling, that he had to face himself and never give up and face his issues. And so he became who he was by being imprisoned. And I believe we're all imprisoned in our own programming in our brain. And he liberated himself. But what's fascinating about him is he's an example of someone who had a dream, obviously, for South Africa to be liberated, and he never gave his dream up, even though he was in prison and for a life sentence. I mean, it wasn't like he had hope that one day he would get out and, you know, be able to do something. It was that he was never going to get out, but what he did is he worked on himself and he faced his fears and he stood up for himself in various ways, even though he was afraid at certain times. And he never gave his dream up. And the most interesting thing is how the Afrikaners came to him and got him out of jail. And that's what I really believe, that if we don't give up on ourselves and we hold our dream, opportunities will find you. It's not you going out and making them happen. It is you making them happen, but on another level. So if you just think about his story and how they came to him, they got him out of jail, and he became president. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And so that's what we have to do, I think, is never give up and always hold our dream and do whatever we can do, unravel or unfold ourselves and where we're blocked.
Now, of all the thousands of people that you've seen, what have been the main attributes of the people who are able to do 180s in their lives?
Oh, they never gave up. Because lots of times people want a quick fix, so they'll come in and they just want to feel better. So, you know, what they would like is, you know, take these supplements and feel better. And so once they get over the first part of it, where they start feeling better, or their health, they recover with their health, or they get the boyfriend they want, or they start making more money or whatever, which is great. You know, they often quit working on themselves in terms of like long-term goals or really making changes innerly that they would want to change. So I would say that people that I've seen that have created the most success on all levels, not just materially, but innerly, they were people that were always striving to better themselves, to have better relationships, to be more effective in the world, to, you know, whatever their calling is, to help other people, to help the planet. And so they were driven to not give up on their inner development, so that they could make the substantial changes in the world and in relationships that they wanted to.
What happens if we don't go after our goals and if we don't start living in alignment with the selves that we envision and we start to accumulate stress?
Well, I think that, you know, that does generate a lot of stress because some part of us knows that we're not living true to ourselves and true to our dream and true to our heart. And so I don't think that people often are aware that by not following your heart and your dream and just, you know, denying it or repressing it, that that's generating a lot of unhappiness or sadness in your heart, probably, for not following your dream. So again, I think it's being bold enough and willing enough to really announce what your dream is and go for it, no matter what, and find help and ways to do it, and that you'll never give up. One of the things that you and I were talking about a little while ago is what happens with stress in the body in general. So there's all the different factors of stress, whether it's biochemical, nutritional, emotional, energetic, structural. Is one of the things that happens is that the adrenal glands get exhausted, because the adrenal glands are a primary organ on the front, so to speak, for dealing with stress and producing hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that handle the stress that we have in the body. And over time, if they're active too much and producing too much of those hormones, they start breaking down and they stop producing hormones. And the body, what the body does is it adapts and it lowers the metabolism to try to preserve the health of the adrenals and the other organs, and that's how it goes into chronic fatigue. So chronic fatigue is a name that you hear a lot in this day and age, and it can be caused by any of the factors in terms of a combination of emotional stresses or biochemical or infections. But adrenal exhaustion is definitely one of those stressors that happens, or a result of stress, where the whole metabolism will lower to try to preserve the adrenals because they're just running wild trying to keep up with all the stuff that we've got going on. Another endocrine that suffers is the thyroid, and a lot of people have low thyroid, which again is the result of different toxicities or emotional stress. But it can also lower just because the adrenals are exhausted and the whole metabolism lowers and the thyroid lowers. So having chronic stress is a perfect setup for exhaustion and chronic fatigue. And that's a lot of what I see that comes into my practice. Is that's usually one of the first things people say, is that they're exhausted.
As a primer for us, we can stop eating processed foods, we can avoid foods with gluten, we can start exercising, and then we should seek help to deal with our emotional structure that we have, and some of our beliefs that we have that we aren't going to be able to outthink ourselves, or would be certainly a challenge to be able to see your way through the maze that you've built up in your head. So on that end, how could we contact you, and what is your availability, and what is the best way for us to make an appointment? Do we have a consultation over the phone? Do we speak to a receptionist? Do we come in and make an appointment? How does that process work?
I do work with clients all over the world, so I have people that live in Los Angeles that come to see me in person, and I also see clients or have sessions with people in this country and all over the world, in which case that would be by phone or FaceTime or some other high-tech thing. But you can call me at 310-277-0241 or visit my website, which is www.drmarylurane.com, and all my contact information is on there.
Okay, brilliant. And in the meantime, what is one thing that we can do today to start to put ourselves towards a path of feeling a little more at ease?
Well, what I really recommend is, I think that it's really valuable if you find something that you really want to create in life that you haven't experienced yet, and you write it out, write a story about it. Put yourself in the story and write out what's happening now that you have this either event or job or money or relationship. And so create a story for yourself as if it's happening now, and envision it as often as you can, and you can add to it every day. You can think about it, reread it, add to it, and draw a symbol that represents it, or find a symbol. It's very successful when you combine your thought and feeling and emotion with a picture that represents it. And so when I create a symbol for something that I want to bring into my life, I put it next to my bed, and I look at it every night before I go to bed, and just take a few moments and feel the feeling of what it's going to feel like when it happens in my life. And I look at it again in the morning and do the same thing when I wake up. So you want to envision your symbol or your concept of what you want to create as if it's happening now. And the more you energize it with your heart and your feeling, then you'll start to see little bits and remnants of it happening in your life. Like everything that starts happening, it's interesting, seems to be pointing in that direction. Even if nothing big is starting to happen, just notice little things that happen and say, wow, you know, somebody was talking about, let's say you want to have a restaurant. So all of a sudden you start meeting people that own restaurants, or somebody's talking about how you could start a restaurant or something. And so you start to see that things start popping into your life, and then you get more ideas, and then it helps you to visualize it more. So that's what I would do, that where you start to look at see the evidence in life once you start putting your mind and your heart on something you want.
Fantastic, Dr. Rane. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me
Thank you.
And we'll go with that. I think it's, you have to identify what you want, and then let open up a space to have it come in.
Yay.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.